A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
Recently, there has been much discussion regarding a new autonomous private Beth Din, which is converting young children whose parents are not Jewish. What is the rabbi's opinion on the matter?
Before getting into the more technical side of the issue, I wish to point out that I know that some people are of the impression that I usually take an anti-Haredi stance and usually for or in agreement with Rabbanim or certain Rabbanim from the non-Haredi parts of the Orthodox world, shall we say. But in fact that is not true, and I wish to make it plain that it is not always the case that a position that is supported by most Haredi poskim, shall we say, is necessarily wrong. That is entirely not true, and equally it is untrue that a position that is supported by, in this case not all, not even most, by certain Rabbanim and certain poskim, some of whom, not all of whom, are from the Dati Leumi, or the national religious sector of the Orthodox world, that does not prove that such a position is correct. My view, my approach is to judge all issues as objectively and as open-mindedly as possible, to take into account all the facts, first of all to know the facts, and then to use as required our analytical abilities as human beings, which is these abilities are God-given, so that we can analyze and understand the situation before us. With regards to this particular question, we have to first of all clarify and admit plainly that there is a mahloket ha-poskim, there is a disagreement amongst the poskim about this question of converting a child who is not Jewish and whose parents are not Jewish, or for that matter the same would apply to a situation where the parent, one of the parents perhaps is a non-observant Jew, a non-Orthodox Jew. In other words, the household is not a Jewish Orthodox household, and the parents do not lead a Jewish lifestyle by any stretch of the imagination. Is it correct in such a situation to convert a child? Because the Gemara says that it is possible for a child to be converted based on the fact that the parents and the Beth Din want to convert this child. Does this also apply in such a situation? Regarding this question, there has been discussion for a number of generations, in fact, amongst many great poskim. And without going into all the details, I will just say, first of all, as follows. The arguments of those poskim who say that it is possible to do so, the arguments they mention, that they adduce, are entirely of a speculative nature. In other words, the claim is that, as it says in the Talmud, that to convert a non-Jew into a Jew is a zechut for the person. The person is receiving something of very great value and merit, and this is something that is good for the person involved, and therefore it is possible and mutar to do so for a child, even though the child hasn't asked you to do so, because he's not old enough to ask you, and he doesn't understand what it is that he's asking, or he would be asking, or what he's getting into at this point. Yet it is a zechut, it is a merit for him, and it will be a merit for him in the future. The question is it a merit for such a person if we know, or if we can assume, that this person will grow up in a home where there is no concept of Torah and Mitzvot, and therefore he will not receive such an education, and therefore it is certain, or close to certain, that he himself will not grow up to be a Jew who keeps the Mitzvot. Is it in that case also a zechut for such a person to be converted, or is it in fact quite the opposite? Is it a hovah for such a person to be converted? Because then this person will be guilty every Shabbat for desecrating the Shabbat, and for having relations with a nidah, and for eating on Yom Kippur, and the list goes on and on. Is that in fact any kind of zechut at all? certain poskim have claimed, without any firm proof, that just the fact that a person is considered part of the Jewish people, that itself is a zechut for this person, and that is sufficient reason. And others have claimed that it's possible that at one point in his life, on one occasion at least, he will perform a given mitzvah, and that is sufficient reason to consider this act of giyur to be a zechut. These arguments are all speculative and far from certain. On the other hand, on the other side of the equation, we have many poskim who claim that, seeing that the essential part of giyur, of conversion, is kabbalat ha-mitzvot, is accepting with a true and sincere heart an acceptance of the mitzvot, and seeing that a child obviously cannot do this as being a child, that is why we have the concept of a child being converted al da'at beit din, that the beit din assumes for this child the responsibility of his education and his future performance and adherence to the mitzvot. And this is based on the fact that the parents are interested in so doing. In other words, the parents are those who guarantee essentially to the Beit Din that we will bring him up in such a fashion. He will know what it means to be a Jew, he will know what the mitzvot are, he will know what he must do and what he must not do. And therefore, on that basis, it is possible to convert such a person. And even then we have to ask the person later when he grows up if he's in fact interested in continuing to be a Jew, as was assumed when he was a child. And seeing that when speaking of non-Jewish parents, or parents who are perhaps Jewish but very far removed from any kind of Jewish lifestyle and any kind of knowledge or understanding of what it means to live a Jewish life, and therefore it is clear that they will not bring up their child in such a fashion, and therefore we know for a fact, or we can assume with great certainty, that this person will not grow up to be a Torah-observant Jew. Therefore, the notion of converting such a child of such a family in these circumstances is entirely spurious and cannot be justified. And in my opinion, this is the much more reasonable and much more clear-cut and much more convincing argument, because here we are not discussing about some speculative concept of whether it is a zechut for a person to be a Jew or not, which is something that we can't measure. It's not as if anyone has a machine or some kind of mitzvah meter or zechut meter or some other device which can measure and tell us whether it is a zechut for this person to be placed in such a situation or not. We haven't, Chazal don't explain to us how we are to judge such a thing, and it is therefore purely speculative. On the other hand, the understanding, the concept of a giyur, of a katan, the conversion of a child, is based on the understanding, the plain and simple understanding that the parents want it to be so because they want to bring him up as a Jew. For example, the most common example of this would be a couple, shall we say, who had a child, a non-Jewish couple, who then convert, and they wish now their child also to be part of the Jewish people, as they have now become part of the Jewish people. So they take their 3-year-old child to the Beit Din and say, we want to convert our child as well, just as we have converted. We as adults converted because we want to, and we know what that means, and we studied, and we perform the Torah and the Mitzvot as we should. Our child will also do so, and we know so, we guarantee it. At least we will do everything in our power to do so, because we will bring him up in such a fashion. Then the Beit Din may go ahead and do so, but when there is no such basis in reality for such an assumption, then such a giyur is not possible. This is the opinion of a number of poskim, and I will quote very briefly. The latter opinion, that such a conversion is not possible in such circumstances, is the opinion of the Gaon, the Bar Sridei Esh, in Chelik Bet, Siman Nun Zayin. It is also the opinion of Rav Kook, Rav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook Zetzal, in Da'at Kohen, Siman Chof Mem Zayin. He specifically relates to such a question, and he writes in no uncertain terms, and here I wish to quote from Rav Kook, that such a giyur is not possible. Rav Kook writes, and this is to be found in Siman Kof Mem Zayin, as we said, in Da'at Kohen, one of the Sefer of the Teshuvot of Rav Kook, page Resh Samech Zayin. Omnam, kol ze hu rak im hu be'ofen kazeh she'anu yoda'im shebegadluto yikayim et hamitzvot. This concept of converting a child, says Rav Kook, is based on the knowledge or the solid assumption based on reality that this person will perform and live according to the mitzvot when he grows up. The acceptance of the mitzvot is the ikar, is the essential element of giyur. This is ma'akev. This is an explicit reference of Rav Kook to the halacha that kabbalat mitzvot is ma'akev. Without that, there is no giyur. ואפילו אם קיבל שלא הייתה הקבלה כדין, דהיינו שלא הייתה ביום ובשלושה, כמובא בשולחן ערוך, אם כן מסתברא מילתא דלדידן דקיימלן דגר קטן צריך שיהיה מדעת אביו או מדעת אמו. Seeing that the halacha is that a child has to be that is to be converted by the Beit Din has to be done with the agreement of, with the explicit intention and desire of the parents, at least of the father or the mother. It is only when we know that the parents are interested and they want to do this for the right reason and they know what it involves and they intend to live up to their part of the deal and bring him up in such a fashion, then the Beit Din goes ahead and converts the child. Therefore, it must be the case that at least one of his parents, or preferably both of them, the parents have to hand him over to the Beit Din, as it were, for the process of conversion, on the assumption and with the intention that this will be the reality, this will be the education that the child would receive. And this is also the position of Hagaon Rabbi Shilo Israeli, for example. This is straightforward halachic thinking, and to my mind, unassailable logic. The ikar of giyur is kabbalat mitzvot. If there is no basis in reality, based on a simple common sense approach and assessment of the facts before us, that this child will grow up to be such a person, because the parents are not such people, and in some cases, in many cases that are being discussed at present, the parents are not even Jewish, and therefore it is rather strange to imagine they will bring up their child as a religious Jew and encourage him to be so. When there is no basis in reality for any such assumption, such a giyur is not possible. So this is the view of many poskim. And one should add that even amongst those, some of the poskim who say that essentially, technically, such a giyur is possible, even when the parents are not such people and do not have such an intention. Nevertheless, many of those same poskim write that it is nevertheless not correct for a Beit Din to take it upon itself to do such a giyur. This is the view of Hagaon Agadol Bar-Hayim Grozhensky in Ahiezer Chelik Gimel Siman Kaf Het. He says that technically perhaps you could make the argument that such a giyur is possible, but he says, in his words, En levet din kasher lehizdakek lechach. A proper Beit Din will not take upon itself such a giyur, will not deal with such things. Rav Moshe Feinstein in Even HaEzer, Chelek Daled Siman Kaf, also writes, he says it's possible to do such a giyur because, and there he's talking about the specific case where the child in question, although the parents may not be religious, but he's being sent to a religious school, and there will be religious teachers. He will find himself in a religious Torah environment, and in that situation that Rav Moshe Feinstein was referring to, in that particular teshuvah, he thought it was very reasonable to assume the child would grow up to be a Torah Jew, and therefore he said it's possible to do such a giyur. Where this is not the case, he was less emphatic about it, even though he wasn't entirely opposed either, but it was much less clear. Rav Ovadia Yosef also is of the opinion that technically it might be possible to do such a giyur, but he writes, if there is a hashash that the child will not grow up to be a Torah Jew and will grow up to be a Mahalel Shabbat and Yom Tov, etc., etc., in his words, Machon, Shilo legairam, it is correct not to convert such people, such children. So even amongst those who think that technically such a giyur may work in terms of the absolute bottom line of the halacha, nevertheless, many of them were opposed to the concept. And again, their assumptions or their reasoning is usually of a speculative nature, whereas the simple, straightforward logic that kabbalat mitzvot is the ikar, and where the child can't do it, the parents have to come and stand in for him and take it upon themselves to bring him up in such a way, and only then can the Beit Din act. And where this does not exist, such a giyur cannot really be rationalized. That is a much more plain, straightforward, common sense and reasonable position. which is based on solid sources and halachic reasoning. So that, in a nutshell, is my position on the matter. However, it must be added that this is not really the crux of the matter. The argument being forwarded by all the rabbanim involved in this initiative to convert such children of non-Jewish parents, immigrants from the former Soviet Union, who perhaps have some Jewish ancestry and the like, but are not halakhically Jewish, and who do not see themselves as Jews, and certainly do not live a Jewish lifestyle, and do not have any intention of doing so. The logic of all these rabbanim is, and this is their position as they themselves explain it, that we are trying to prevent intermarriage. In other words, they say as follows: we have all these people who arrived from the Soviet Union. We're talking about at least 350,000, some say more like 500,000 immigrants from the former Soviet Union who arrived beginning in the early 90s, who are not technically Jewish. Some of them have Jewish ancestry, and some do not even have that. Some arrive simply with forged documents. That was an entire industry in the Soviet Union that had collapsed, and all the experts in forging documents who worked for the KGB were out of a job, and it was very easy and not very expensive either to acquire such documents, but proving that your grandmother was Jewish or something to that effect. This is well known to those who wish to know the facts, and thus many people arrived in this country at that time, 25 years ago, who are plainly not Jewish, and they had children, they are having children, or their children today are having children, and therefore we're talking about many individuals, thousands of individuals, many thousands, perhaps tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of individuals in the country today who will, in the fullness of time, already starting now, be marrying or will wish to marry Jews here in Israel. And there is no question that this is true. These facts are correct. There is such a problem, and the question is what to do about it, or what can be done about it. The suggestion that we can rectify this situation brought about by the scandalous and criminal negligence of the Israeli government or governments of the time, allowing these people into the country without proper checks, and some claim that it was done deliberately in order to bolster those who would vote for the left. And by the way, it apparently worked at least once. That is how Yitzhak Rabin came to power in 1991 or 92. I don't recall the exact year, and that was at least one occasion, the only occasion in living memory almost, that the left was able to find its way into the government, and that was as a result of the vote of many of those immigrants. Some claim this was a deliberate policy of that government. Be that as it may, it was clearly negligent and scandalous that they behaved in such a manner and allowed this situation to come to pass. Having done so, now the question is what can and should be done about it. The fact is there are hundreds of thousands of such people. Every year more are being born, and the danger of intermarriage is very, very real and very great, no doubt. It is also equally true that very, very few of these people are interested in converting. Perhaps 25 years ago, some of them thought that they would have to convert if they wanted to stay here, or they thought they would be discriminated against in Israel if they did not convert, or they would be difficult to live here if they were not Jewish or listed as Jewish. But over time they've all come to see that it is not so. They're not discriminated against. It is not hard to live here if you're not Jewish. No one bothers you. Everything is fine. Such a person has no interest in converting. The numbers speak for themselves. Since 1995, only 24,000 immigrants from the former Soviet Union have been converted through the Batei Din of the Rabbanut, of the Chief Rabbinate. Since the year 2000, the number on average has been 1,800 converts per year. In other words, a very tiny percentage of this very large population of hundreds of thousands of people who are not Jewish and admit to being not Jewish, and most of whom will tell you in a very straightforward fashion they have no interest in becoming Jews, certainly not if it involves having to accept the miswot. Therefore, the expectation that it will be possible, or there will be a huge rush, as it were, on the Batei Din of these private Batei Din to convert people, adults or children, is entirely spurious. My, I believe, educated guess would be that not more than several hundred or several thousand people would perhaps come forward, or children will be brought forward by their parents for such conversions, for whatever reason that the parents might consider it to be advantageous for their children to be considered Jewish officially, but certainly not because they actually want them to be Jewish, that is to say, to actually know what it means to be a Jew, to study Torah, to keep the mitzvot, to keep Shabbat, etc. This is clearly not going to be part of the motivation of such parents, even if there are several thousand such parents. And therefore, I do not understand the logic, the rationale of these rabbanim. They are trying to prevent massive intermarriage. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. How can converting a few thousand at most solve this problem? And therefore, the approach here, to me, seems to be entirely wrong. To go out on a halachic limb, to proceed with a type of conversion which is very, very dubious, to put it mildly, which anyhow will certainly not be accepted by large parts of the Torah world, in order to ostensibly solve a certain problem, namely intermarriage, when in fact it's not even going to achieve this, or will only do this in very, very small, nearly insignificant numbers. The rationale here and the approach, to me, seem entirely mistaken and misguided. It reminds one, I think, of those who claim that in order to maintain a certain demographic balance between Jews and Arabs, in other words, not to put too fine a point to it, that there are too many Arabs in this country, and this is of course what certain leftists say, although they claim to be non-biased, but in fact they like Arabs as much as the next person, which is to say not very much. Therefore, they say in order to improve the demographic balance, we must rid ourselves of parts of our homeland, because there are many Arabs there, in order that the proportion of the Jews in the general populace be higher. This is not the solution. It will not lead to any positive outcome. The solution, of course, is to first of all understand, to study the Torah and understand that Eretz Yisrael is given only to the Jewish people, and it is intended only for the Jewish people, that non-Jews do not have a place in the land of Israel, certainly not at this point in history, not under present conditions, without going into all the details and technicalities and the possible scenarios in the future. Today, this is not part of what a Torah Jew should be interested in. It is not part of what Hashem plans for us, and therefore such people do not have a place in the land of Israel, and therefore this has to be taught, this has to be understood and disseminated, internalized, and then eventually acted upon in order to bring about a more positive demographic balance, to quote these people. In the same way, to prevent intermarriage, we have to first discuss how it is that these people were allowed to immigrate to Israel. Who's responsible for this? What were their motives? How to prevent this happening in the future, and how to explain, perhaps, to these people they are better off living elsewhere. That would be a much more productive and much more halakhically correct approach to this matter.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.